Okay, folks, so we're live across Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So good afternoon to everybody. This is a family business practice event, which we're looking forward to. We've got Kevin Brent speaking today. The subject you're going to speak on, Kevin, is
the fundamentals of scaling up, I think.
fantastic. So if we get the technology to work, we'll see if you do. If you want to hit the share button, and we'll see how we go.
Okay, I'm going to try and do something a little bit different, I think, today. Okay, so we need the window, don't we, to share on that? So it must be that one, I think. Is that the right? Does that look about like it might be right?
And it's got a chance. Can everybody see that? No, that means you've hit the wrong button somehow, I suspect.
The wrong
Hold on.
button. So
Hold on a minute. What we'll do is I'm going to take you out off the screens, guys. Means you're still in the studio, but Kevin's with me. So now try pushing the share button.
Okay.
So and you should be all right.
So share screen. Da-da-da. So it should be the window. I mean, I did. Let's see. I want slideshow. Should be that.
Hang on. I got it. There you go. And I'll bring everybody back in now. So Kevin, off you go.
Brilliant. So we're off and running, are we?
Yeah, we're off and running.
All right. So what I thought I'd do is something a little bit different. So I've got a little animated PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to talk over. So this is the first time that I've done this online. So I've done it once or twice face to face. So we'll see how it goes. It might be a disaster, but we'll see how it goes. But what I wanted to do was just to cover some of the fundamentals of scaling up and looking at a little bit at, first of all, at the aspect of the scale up journey, because this is the way that we work with our business owners and start to frame things, but then looking then at the pillars of scaling up, the things that we need to think about as we're transitioning from one step to the next. So let's see how this all works. So that should be playing a little bit of an animated stuff behind the scenes. So Peter, do tell me if it's not. But no doubt all of us here and other people listening have been running our business for a few years, and we're probably enjoying some level of success. But we might be starting to feel a little bit out of control at times. You know, maybe we're not sure if we're doing things right. Maybe not even sure how we got to where we're getting to, and struggling maybe to think about managing those next steps and taking control of things. We might be having increasing challenges with people issues or cash issues, and perhaps we've even got half an eye on trying to build a valuable business. You know, maybe the sort of business that somebody might even want to buy at some point. And maybe we're wondering if in fact the business is scalable at all, because scaling up isn't easy. And by now we probably realize that there's not a simple step. And the stats prove it. We know that half of businesses fail within the first 5 years, 2/3 fail within 10 years. So only a third of businesses survive for more than 10 years. And when we look at the sizes of business, then only less than 1% scale beyond 50 employees. And in fact, less than 4% or about 4% scale beyond 10 employees. And in our experiences of working with a number of business owners, several hundred over the years, there's a couple of things that separate out those that do succeed from those that don't. And one of those is working to a proven system, the structured system and strategies of scaling up and understanding that scale up journey, and it being different from linear growth and just sort of drifting into growth, as it were. And the other is harnessing and understanding and harnessing the power of peer working with a small group of like-minded, credible business owners as a kind of a sounding board for each other to overcome barriers to success, but also keep each other accountable to the important things that need to be done. So I'd like to take a quick look at what we mean by that scale-up journey. And it's a series of stepping stones, not a wiggly line or a straight line growth. And the first of those is as a solopreneur. And the second, then typically 3 to 5 people, got a small team, then 8 to 12, 20, 25, 40 to 60, and so on. Or if you prefer to look at it in terms of turnover, then roughly, I mean, it depends by business type and sector, but we're typically looking at about 100,000 turnover, 500,000, 1 million, 2 to 2.5, 5 million, 25 to 60 as those stepping stones. But But why these numbers? We'll look at it in a little bit more detail. It basically is around team sizes, and on our own, we can build that great business and we can make it really successful. It can be really nice and profitable. And if that's where we want to be, that's absolutely fantastic. And we can climb that ladder to success, but it's a different ladder from the 3 to 5 business. If you want to build a business with a team of 3 to 5 people, then we've got to manage increasing complexities in terms of communications. Maybe we've got to think about whether we've got the right business model, and we've also got to pay salaries. Of course, it's no longer good enough to have good and bad months that we can afford to take less or more a month. We can't really expect our people to do that. So, not to mention, of course, we're now facing increasing challenges in terms of recruiting and managing people. So we need to think about it in that way. And we've begun to transition from owning a job to owning a business. And this next staging post of 3 to 5 is another great place to be. We've got a team that's now big enough to benefit from collaborative thinking, but not so big that we're going to lose control or find it really difficult. But we can't just step from the top of the solopreneur ladder to the top of the 3 to 5 ladder. We have to join at a lower rung. And if you think about it, we've probably got to invest a little bit to get there, certainly in terms of recruitment, maybe, but maybe in terms of lead generation activities, there may be some other things that we need to think about doing. So we have a little bit of a dip before we get to that stepping stone. It's that valley of death, as it's sometimes called, where we're busy struggling to keep control of things, and we might feel that actually, although we've got more customers, we've got more money coming in at the top, but we might be wondering where that money is going. Maybe it's not appearing in our bank accounts at the end of the day. Maybe we're starting to tear our hair out in terms of time, and maybe even struggling with a few people things. So we can languish in that valley and slip back, or if we really get it wrong, then we can even potentially kill the business entirely. So we could slip back, or actually we could really struggle with the business. So that first transition from the 1 to the 3 to 5 is probably the most obvious and the most easy to get our heads around. But we have the same thing throughout the scale-up journey. Every stepping stone that we're trying to get to, there's this valley of death specific to that one in between. So that ladder for the 8 to 12 is different from the 3 to 5, and so on as we go up. And each time we've got to recognize that there is this potential valley in between, and we've got to think about what we need to do then in terms of transitioning that step so that we don't get stuck and languishing in one of those valleys for a long time. So can we fund that through cash flow, for example? Do we need to access additional finance, or how do we do that? And how long are we going to allow ourselves to do that? Is it our 3-year plan to get to the next stepping stone, or is it 5 years? Is it shorter, or is it longer? So those are some of the things that we need to think about there. And as we go from this next stepping stone to the 8 to 12, then typically this is where we've really got to think about things like lead generation, but we are starting to think more and more about proper systems within the business here, and account management to grow and retain existing customers. And it's probably the sort of stage where the leader-follower model, that typical model, starts to break down. And we might even need to be thinking here now about things like quality controls, and maybe things like ISO, and making sure that we've got all of that covered. We've probably also built up a load of different applications, different software tools, and now might be the time to integrate those and to consolidate those. And this is a really great place to be. We've probably built a big enough business now that it is funding the kind of lifestyle that we wanted. We've definitely got a business with great collaboration, or should be going on, and we're less reliant on any individual person. If 1 or 2 people decide to leave the business, then it's less likely to have a big impact on the business. And it's often the sort of time when we might need to think about having a number 2 coming in the business as well, because we started to reach the limit really of one leader with others following. And then I'm just going to cover this next step, just to finish off really from this perspective, because this is a really big step now, going from to 20, 25 people. And we need to think about whether we're going to do this potentially by acquisition or by merging potentially within there. It's often the time when we need to think about having a part-time or a full-time financial director to really start to think about the cash. And we've got extra communications and extra layer of management in there as we build that senior leadership team. And the finance is often the weakest point at this transition, is really understanding those numbers, whereas earlier on it was probably more around the marketing and the lead generation side of things. So on and so on. As we go up the scale up journey, we've got to think about what does each transition look like, ensuring we climb the ladder from one to the next, and planning before we try and jump into that transition. So we should do so really from a solid platform, getting to the top of one of those ladders before we move in. And by the way, it's perfectly fine to think about, you know what, I don't want to keep scaling. I'm happy. We're not just scaling for the sake of scaling. I'm happy at this point. Let me build this business the best that it can be, and let me climb that ladder of success essentially to the top of that one. We don't have to keep scaling up. So that's an overview of the scale up journey and what we mean by that scale up journey. And in order to successfully transition those valleys of death from one pillar to the next, there are 4 key pillars that we need to think about: the strategy, people, execution, and cash. And if we're not, those are the systems and the strategy, that's where they come in. And if we're not good on all 4 of those, then we are going to struggle to scale. We're going to hit a ceiling at some point. That ceiling could be relatively early on, relatively small business, or it could be actually when we've already got hundreds of employees. But we need to be good at all of these 4 things. So, but looking just a little bit more detail, we need to have the right differentiated strategy and business model to be able to scale. We've got to be able to find, hire, attract, and retain the right people. We've got to get the right people to do the right things with ruthless efficiency. They've got to execute that strategy brilliantly. And of course, we've got to manage the cash along the way. And as I said, if we don't get all these things right, we will fail to scale, or we may simply fail altogether. Now, the emphasis of these pillars may change depending on where we are on that scale up journey, but the 4 pillars themselves won't. So when planning that transition, we need to do so in the light of those 4 pillars. So in terms of the strategy, what do we need to think about? In terms of the people, what do we need to think about here? In terms of the delivery, the execution, which by the way includes our business development or our lead generation activities. And we need to think about the cash as we go. And overarching those 4 pillars are 2 further principles, if you like, that we need to be aware of and think about. And one is leadership, and the other is building for value. And with the leadership side, in the early days, it tends to be more about being the best version of ourselves that we can be, developing ourselves as a leader, but also thinking about then the things that we can delegate, the things that we're not so good at or that we shouldn't be doing. So we might be delegating things like our admin or our bookkeeping, all things that I'm sure we've all gone through, and whether we're doing that by outsourcing or by recruiting potentially. But after that point of the 8 to 12 sort of level, when I said the leader follower model starts to break down, we need to be developing great leaders behind us within the business. And often that's one of the reasons why it's such a difficult transition. And we can fall into that owner's trap where the business is too over-reliant on us as an individual. So if we're the one bringing in all of the key accounts, we need to be able to get somebody to do that. So we need to start to delegate the things at that point that we are good at. So that's the big difference. Up to that point, we're delegating things that probably we're just not so good at ourselves, or are distracting us from the things where we add the real value. But after that point, we need to be able to find people that can do even the things that we are really good at. Otherwise, we just create that owner's trap. And then in terms of value, it's essential to build values, not just for ourselves, but perhaps other stakeholders within the business, so that we create a business that gives us options in the future, and that we don't just have to, so do we understand how to build the business for value to give us those options, which may not be to sell. It could be to sell, but it could be to transition it down, because we know that we're going to exit our businesses at one point, whether willingly or not. So we need to be able to think about that, and it'd be great to be able to not have to just do a fire sale or simply close the business down altogether. So there we have it. Essentially, that's all I wanted to cover. I've just given you a quick overview of the ideas of the scale-up journey and why it's important to recognize that as a series of stepping stones or staging posts, if you like, and those valleys of death, and then that framework for how to scale up the business. So that's essentially it there, and probably a good time to think about any questions.
Can you just free the screen up, Kevin, first of all, please?
Yeah, I'm just attempting to find the right.
Press the button.
There we are. There we are. Stop the screen share. I think that's it.
Go. A quick round of applause. Go. Well done, everybody. Great presentation, Kevin. Very interesting that you've used that style of presentation today, which is good. We've been running for 16 minutes now, and I try and make this live part about a maximum of between 20 and 25 minutes. So, and then we're going to rabbit to each other afterwards as part of the practice. But for this live part of the transmission, questions, anybody? Nigel, I know you put something up in the chat box.
Yeah, no, just to say, Kevin, we're singing from the same hymn sheet. This is what I preach as well. Very,
fantastic.
very. No, it's exactly that. That when I'm coming from it from a change point of view, from the way it's developed within a business, and it's very much about that struggle to get out of that valley or into that valley or across that valley.
Yeah,
and I'm saying exactly the same things. Don't jump into the valley. Plan. Think about the people you need. Think about how you're going to pay for it. Think about what you need to have in place, and that change, that theory of change process of making sure that you put everything in place, and you know what needs to be in place before you start traveling on your journey to the next level.
Super.
It's incredibly important, and I think a lot of companies fail because they just run at it, hit the wall, fall over, and go, "Well, what went wrong?"
Exactly, and that's where we came from right at the beginning. Was thinking about, what are the reasons why only 4% of businesses make it? Fair enough. There's probably a big chunk in there that don't want to. That's fine. They're quite happy being on their own, or the couple of people. That's great. But there's a significant chunk in there of people that actually have something and would like to, but they perhaps just don't understand quite how to go about doing it. So that's what we set about doing, was building that structure, and then the support within each of those stages to make those transitions.
It's about, yes, from my point of view, it's about the mindset tends to be around always using the same sort of techniques that you do to run your business, instead of looking at it as a change, a project, a different way of looking at it, and it's searching for all those things that are going to trip you up, that are going to get in.
Sandy, not Sandy, so Jay, I was thinking, what do you think? Because obviously you built Lancelot, and you've probably been through a couple of these stages. What do you think?
I completely agree with what you've said, and it rings true for us in our business. The question that I had for you was, we understand the process. Well, full well we understand the process because we've spoke to you about it many times. But what would you say to companies that are in the same situation as us, that have a fear of taking that next step? Yes, we understand the process, we know what we need to do, we've put a lot of that in place, but there's always that little step that you have to take off the top of that pillar into that dip, that is the fear of the unknown. And that's what I think where John and I are. We're very, very comfortable in the position where we're at, and it would take a lot of time and effort for us to push and go through those processes to get us up to the next level. You were talking about it's almost double turnover revenue, probably not double people, but certainly at least two to three more people, which is a lot more admin in the back end. What would you say to people that do look at it that way and think it's the fear of that next step?
Yeah, I think absolutely right. Remind me how many people you've got?
6.
6. Yeah.
Sort of
So
half-
you're yeah. So you're just in there. I mean, you know, it's obviously not hard and fast, but you're somewhere around there. Yeah, I think it's what Nigel was sort of saying there as well, is trying to get control of things you can get control of. So you'll never be able to cover absolutely everything. There'll always be something that will come out that you hadn't thought of. So it's think about, why do we want to? Do we actually want to make that transition? Right, first of all, and why, and understanding why it's important for us to do that. It could be because you think that actually at that stage the business should be generating the right level of profits out of the business that will be really sustainable, and we think we've got a business there that also isn't too reliant on any one or two individuals. So that's maybe some of the reasons. But then planning it really out and trying to cover off the key aspects. So imagining the business, what does it have to look like to be able to run at that level? What systems have we got to have in place that we maybe haven't got now? Is there a change we need to do in our strategy and our business model, or is that okay? And thinking it through with those 4 pillars in mind, and trying to get control of the things that you can see. And then, yes, you've then got to kind of have the confidence, which is why I was saying in there as well, if you haven't got your business to be running well where you are now, do that first. So and one of the things we say on the profitability side of things, and we have to be careful here because there's lots of distortions in our P&Ls, but if we put ourselves in as a market rate salary in the P&L for all the directors, because that's often the biggest distortion, if we're not making between 10 and 15% net profit, then we need to work on getting there before we start that transition.
For us, I think very much it's well, for me personally, it's a staff thing. We've got an absolutely fabulous team. John and I can step away from the business for days off, which I'm sure Peter will smile to himself to know that John actually lets go and lets other people do stuff. Like at last, so that's quite good, and we're very happy. But to grow that family, my business family, I need to know that I'm bringing on board the right staff, and at the moment that's really difficult, and I'd have to have that piece in place definitely, I think, before I'd be prepared to take the next step. So we've done all of the other stuff and we're doing okay. It's just
Good.
Recruiting now at the moment. I think quite a lot of people struggling with recruitment. So
It's one of the biggest challenges. Nigel, you got your
yeah, something that occurred to me is from an experience I had recently working with a company in a slightly different guise. I was working on a project that they wanted, a project for a product that they wanted to put in place. But it's a really interesting point, is that if you don't have the leadership in the right frame of mind to work in this way, it will never happen. Because in that instance, the leadership they were expanding by, as you were talking about earlier, Kevin, by merging and acquiring, but the strategy wasn't behind it. So there was always a culture problem within each of the business they'd merged with or acquired.
Yeah.
People didn't, the communication was really bad. And I was creating communication routes between all 3 of the businesses, the main business and the other 2 businesses, and making sure that they were all understanding where they were going. And the interesting thing was we were all tripped up by the owner of the business, who wanted to work in a more chaotic way, by just going in and saying, "Oh, I want you to do this, and I want you to do that," without that community understanding that everybody understands where you're going, why you're going there, and what it's going to look like when you get there, and what the trip points are as you go along.
Yeah.
It was so opaque that it caused a lot of problems. I mean, we still got the thing delivered, but
and that's a really interesting thing. Get into the maths of this if you wanted, but the communication pathways go up exponentially as you add people. So if it's just you and me, Nigel, in a business, there's just one communication channel, right? But if we bring Peter in, then Peter could talk to you, I could talk to you, I could talk to Peter. We got a triangle. And so if you've got 5 people, you've got 10 different connection pathways. If you've got 10 people, you've got 45.
Yep.
Right. So yeah.
Yeah, that was the problem. I mean, that was the interesting issue that were coming out. An instant was, it was a web app product, and the company building the web app were also supposed to be building the mobile app. Unbeknownst to everybody in the central company, the developers over in India had farmed out the mobile app to another company. Then nobody knew.
Yeah.
I was going in saying, so where's your plan for the web app? And where's your plan for the mobile app? Oh, we don't have a plan for the mobile app. Well, but you're delivering it. Oh, well, we gave that to another company. Sorry?
Right.
What company is this? Where's their plan? Are you managing them? If you don't want to manage them, I'll manage them. You know, it was hilarious in hindsight.
Yeah.
It was hilarious at the time. I'm sitting there going, you mean you don't know who's working for you?
You mean it's hilarious in hindsight, Nigel?
Yeah. Well, it was funny at the time in a way, because I kept saying to them, we need to have a proper plan in place for the developers. They have a plan, but it's not communicated and it's not well thought through. Plus, the CEO was dumping new scope onto them willy-nilly without telling anybody else.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's called tactical, not strategic.
Yeah.
But there you go. I'm just conscious of time, guys. So just Dave, Sandy, got any comments on it? Sandy first, maybe.
No, I mean, I like the interpretation of the valley. I hadn't thought about that, but definitely recognise it. So, yeah, very interesting, Kevin.
Thank you. What is it you do, Sandy?
Virtual PA business.
Right, great.
Associate model at the moment, but considering other options to move up to the next level.
Brilliant. Good.
Yeah, it's different models mean different ways of leaping into things. My experience is really simple, which is however much you think it's going to cost, double it.
Well,
at least.
Ted, I came up with the rule of 3 the other day. It takes you 3 times as long, it costs you 3 times as much, and you end up earning a third of what you thought you would.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So whatever you do, it's going to cost more money. That's the golden rule. So I don't know. Dave, how about you?
I find it's fascinating, Kevin. It's really good to go through that, and I've come across models similar to that before. I kind of apply my kind of place on there, and I'm a coach who, you know, I'm my brand. So trying to scale past me, delivering stuff it's not really what I want. But at the same time, I know there's certain things, and then, you know, people like Sandy, you know, it's ideal conversation to have further down the line to be able to spread some of that workload so I can do the stuff that I do. I know in my previous life as a podiatrist, when I ran a clinic, one of the things I always wanted to do was scale a huge, you know, 3 million turnover business employing 30 staff. And I very quickly realized that actually that wasn't where I wanted to go, because it didn't give me the freedom that I needed. So, but it's useful to look at, and I love what you did, where this is where you're scaling up in terms of numbers and business size. But actually, if you're not looking to do that, this is where you can scale in other ways. That was brilliant. So thank you.
Great.
I think the other thing to understand is, particularly if you're running your own business and you are a sole trader, partnership, what have you, and you don't have those aspirations to grow, and there's no reason why you should have it. It's up to you what you want to do. But to understand the challenges that other people face, and that they're your clients or prospects, those are the challenges they're going through. And if they're going through that scaling up process that Kevin talks about so well, if you can help with that process, if you can understand where they're coming from, you've got a better chance of being a really good supplier to them, because most people haven't got a clue of what it means. They go out there and say, can I flog you this press hard, sign your top copy is yours, instead of getting to understand those people, understand where their business is. And if you can do that, you've got a much better chance of creating a proper relationship. And funnily enough, family businesses are better than the average at that. But I am biased about that, as you well know. So there you go. I am conscious of time. I like to try and keep this under 30 minutes, and we're just about on 30 minutes now. So our session is 2 parts today. One part we go live, which and put it across Facebook, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And the second half is, as members of the family business practice, we all have a chat about how we're doing, what we're looking for, and how we can help each other. But we've found putting these sessions out to people, they found it very useful, particularly as we're now putting them across all those live feeds. So my experience from running last week is there's a bunch of comments came through over the next few days. So, we'll answer all of them as best we can. But for now, just again, thanks to Kevin for doing that, and everybody for turning up. Everybody, you'll stay put. I'm going to just push a button to stop the broadcast. And if you've been watching this directly, that's been fantastic. If you catch it at a later date, if you want to know more about the family business practice, familybusinesspractice.com. And thanks for watching.
Thank you.